everyone. Welcome to Reclaiming Pride, a conversation with Paul Nocera. My name is Noah Barron. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the social justice organizer at the Workers' Circle, a Jewish social justice organization that's been defending democracy and advancing workers' rights, immigrant rights, racial justice, and economic justice for more than a century. Today's 30-minute program will include a presentation from Paul Nocera about reclaiming pride and the New York City Queer Liberation March. Then I'll briefly interview Paul, and finally we'll have some time for audience questions. Now it is my privilege to introduce Workers' Circle CEO Ann Toback, who will then introduce Paul.
Hi, welcome everyone. Again, my name is Ann, and I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. The Workers' Circle is so proud to be marching in the Queer Liberation March this coming Sunday. The Queer Liberation March and New York City, where I'm zooming from, is the traditional land of the Lenape people within the Lenape-Hoking territory, who continue to push back against their erasure and for their rights. Paul Nocera, who uses the pronouns he, him, his, is an organizer for queer rights based in New York City. Paul started his activism helping to implement one of the first AIDS awareness programs while a graduate student in the mid-1980s. Over the years, he developed and supported queer student spaces and out-of-class education before joining an LGBT employee resource group in the professional world. Paul played a pivotal role in stewardship of the New York City-based peer support group By Request from 2008 through 2019, growing its base and developing new leaders to better reflect the community it serves. He attended all 3 national bisexual White House summits hosted by the Obama administration. Most recently, Paul has been a core volunteer of the Reclaim Pride Coalition, working to return pride to its roots in the liberation struggle of the Stonewall Rebellion and the grassroots community-led marches that followed. And now it's my pleasure to present Paul to the program.
Thank you very much, Ann and Noah, very much for inviting me in and for being part of the Queer Liberation March for this year. Let me make sure I got everything proper for a slide presentation. There you go. So the Workers' Circle and Reclaim Pride Coalition. We are the official coordinators and organizers of the Queer Liberation March. Reclaim Pride Coalition is an amalgam of people who are focused on reclaiming pride from the police, from the corporations, and from politicians who would otherwise usurp our voice. We started out as a resistance contingent in what's considered the traditional parade. But you know, the traditional parade was actually a march once upon a time, and the New York City Pride Parade is actually called a march. So how did this all come to be, that these activists had felt come together and coordinate this kind of another march? So Reclaim Pride Coalition is the organizers of the Queer Liberation March. And we look at the way that we're organizing from this perspective of generational gifts, heritage versus legacy. You know, heritage is something we inherit from past generations and pass on to our future generations, as a legacy could be. But usually heritage refers to materials and economic inheritance. And legacy really refers to the immaterial and the cultural inheritance. So there's elements here that we're trying to reclaim this legacy and bring the legacy back to where it started, with the spirit of Stonewall. The spirit of Stonewall is in protest. We started out with a protest against police incursions into our spaces at the Stonewall Inn. We're calling attention to the injustice that was happening there, where basically, you know, bars that were LGBT were being asked to give collection money and protection money so that the cops wouldn't close the spaces down. It's in resistance, the spirit of Stonewall, fighting against this oppression. It's in resilience, thriving and striving in America over the last 50 years and plus. And it's in queer community. and understanding what that means as a certain modern tribe that we have of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. We add two-spirit, intersex, and asexual people to that. Non-binary folks and gender non-conforming, all part of the larger queer community. So where did it all begin? Right, here's the New York Times article about thousands of homosexuals is what we were all called back in the day, in a protest rally in Central Park. They didn't mention the march right in the headline, and you see it's below the fold. That was a thing back in the day when newspapers were the thing. Is like if you're below the fold, you're not as important as other things. And then continued on to the second sections further into the newspaper. So we made this the front page of the New York Times in any case. Other news publications did as well. And so when we talk about the spirit of Stonewall, where are we going? So we want to march, we want to rally, and sometimes we do our live stream. Live stream is the newest part of all of this, because 50 years ago, there was no such thing as a live stream, right? There was just the local news might broadcast something in the evening. The rallying and the march were part of the original, protest events that happened both on Stonewall and then afterwards, 1 year following. And there were monthly marches that were happening throughout the months that followed Stonewall, where someone named Brenda Howard, considered the mother of Pride, was one of the organizers, saying right after, like in July and then in August, we have to have a march. We have to have a march. Here's something from 1970 recordings. And so comes to the point of like, why are we marching now? And these questions, are we trying to do all the things that are right for putting together this march? We're marching in our community's tradition of resistance. We're marching against the exploitation of our communities. We're marching in opposition to various phobias and oppressions. This was a poster set up that we had developed for the first march in 2019, but all of these points still hold true today. We want to contrast this a little bit about like, why are we doing this again? Like, why do we have to? Here's a video showing some of the things that happen in the parade.
This is the 49th annual New York City Pride March.
This reminds me of when we passed marriage equality.
Hey, Mayor de Blasio. Mayor de Blasio.
Oh, there's Chuck Schumer, our senator.
On a more serious note, for the council in the city, to not just the Bronx, the whole city, an inspiration.
This is the city of gays and lesbians in New York State.
And there's New York State Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli.
We talked earlier about the 10-year-old and her provocative story. That's even like a huge artist like Lady Gaga. Look how fabulous she looks. I love Cynthia Nixon.
KTU going right by right now. #1 hit music station in New York City, Z100.
T-Mobile is proud to sponsor the 49th New York City Pride March. T-Mobile, are you with us?
We have a guest here with us, John Fryer, who's the Executive Vice President of T-Mobile.
This is our third year as a presenting sponsor here for New York City Pride. We're extending our presenting sponsorship to the year 2021.
T-Mobile right there. We had Executive Vice President on, John Fryer, earlier.
And more T-Mobile, folks.
Nobody covers New York City like T-Mobile.
With T-Mobile, they should be right on that phone, right? At least they've got coverage and connecting with all these fabulous people, all these New Yorkers.
If you had any doubt that there are 2.5 million people here, take a good look, folks.
Right now we see Delta Airlines, Calvin Klein, Jeffrey Bean, Warner's, Olga.
Many brands that many people in the LGBTQ community clearly wear.
Macy's knows how to do a parade. They do the Thanksgiving Day parade.
The first LGBT restaurant in Grand Central Terminal.
It has been very well organized here.
It is an extremely well organized march.
No wristbands! No wristbands! No barricades! No barricades! No barricades! No barricades! Woo! We're the United! Someone was a riot! We're the United! Someone was a riot!
But last year, the march went 9+ hours. It's Robert Larita, the co-president of Disney Pride.
Our theme this year is defiantly different. There are mouse
There they are. They're getting ready to march right now. Disney.
You see, they're with MAC Cosmetics, and it's mostly
is that why
makeup
they
that's
look
making-
so good?
Yeah.
But the NYC Pride March is a platform for our movement.
Just about 200 feet from the iconic Stonewall Inn.
So what we're seeing is VH1 float.
Looking at the Comedy Central float.
All right, we got
Citibank
Citibank coming up.
marching.
NYPD band ceremonial units.
It's such a huge thing to have representation in an organization like the New York Police Department.
GOAL, which stands for Gay Officers Action League, celebrating 36 years of proudly serving the LGBTQ law enforcement, criminal justice professionals.
We also have the New York City Department of Correction Gay Officers Action League there. These are the people that control the prisons.
Off the sidewalk into the street, no wristbands! Off the sidewalk into the street, no wristbands! Off the sidewalk into the street!
So, okay, that was a bit, wasn't it? And it wasn't 9 hours, but it certainly felt like it watching it again. These are some of the things that we're trying to reclaim when we reclaim Pride, when we say that we're doing this, right? We're reclaiming it from the cops. We don't feel that it's proper that police officers march in uniform, oftentimes triggering many of the people that are wanting to march and have a voice in the march. We stand against the idea of sort of the registration and the barriers that are presented in the parade. And the reason is because that sets up a kind of a dynamic where the people who are marching are the entertainment and the people who are on the sidewalk are the audience, and we are not the entertainment. We are marching for our rights. We're marching for our voice. We're marching to highlight the ways in which society is not serving us. So things rainbow in June, but where is the rainbow in July?
Paul, you're cutting out. Would you mind turning your video off while you speak so we can keep hearing you? I would love to
We're in
continue
society.
hearing this important message.
Mm-hmm. Noah, you good? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Folks may know Masha Gessen, who's a journalist and an opinion writer. This is not a moment to stage a parade. This is a moment to march for queer rights. That's from back in 2019, and still the case. Not much has changed. We saw in 2019 also, you know, as the rise of Trump and sort of the right-wing Republican Party sort of taking hold in so many ways, swastikas and burning pride flags were on the rise. Hate crimes generally. And this kind of thing enables folks to further oppress those who are challenged in society. Our history is one of rebellion and solidarity. We have to stand united and refuse to march with police, corporations, and the systemic violence they continue to inflict on immigrants, people of color, marginalized folks from across the queer and trans spectrum. That's Chelsea Manning, who you may know as a whistleblower from problems that the US government were reporting. So, you know, it all started at Stonewall. That was a place, and it's a space that we are working to as well kind of reclaim. It's now been turned into a national monument, and now there flies a progress flag over the monument as part of the efforts for us to work that. That's a community effort. That's not specifically Reclaim Pride, but Stephen Menendez, who's a photographer and a known activist in the city, has been leading up that charge and volunteering really at the monument as part of their community work. So, you know, when folks ask about the police, it's like, okay, what is it? Like, we don't want them to be marching in the parade or in the march. We don't want them to be sort of representing us. The Gay Officers Action League was originally designed to be a kind of a resource group for gay and lesbian people who were police officers, but also a way to challenge and give feedback to NYPD about the ways in which communities are not being served. And right now, the Gay Officers Action League is a rubber stamp on police abuse. So they did apologize in a kind of a formal way, but really, when we take a look deep into it, even the New York City Civil Liberties Union agrees that an apology without action means nothing. And really, people, queer and trans people, are still being harassed. We know that more than 50% of all identifying bisexual people are both women and people of color in different overlaps. So when a stop and frisk is happening, we know that, you know, queer people are going to be impacted by that. It's just a thing. So, you know, we're doing this work, we're trying to make a march and a rally and a live stream, and we're trying to make it with these values that we have both internally and externally, that no cops and no corporations and no usurping of our power or our message. But that means that underneath the tent in the Reclaim Pride organizing space, we have to be focused on what kind of oppression can pop up, whether it's colorism or ageism or any of the various other isms that really all of us as citizens and as global citizens or otherwise, we're steeped in this because we're living in America. We have to look at the labor that we're, you know, using. It's a laborious process to organize a march, and who's able to do the labor, and are the people that we're trying to give voice to, are they able to come into this space, and do they have the free time to extend their labor as well? And oftentimes that's not the case. So the folks that are organizing are in a privileged position. And what kind of a coalition are we? We have different ideas of ways coalitions come together, either as an amalgam of organizations or of individuals. And we're constantly looking at that. We consider the Reclaim Pride Coalition as a living, breathing animal of a sort. And it's transformed from 2019 to 2022. So different things happen over the course of time, and we're trying to be flexible about how we do our organizing so that these things are addressed. Michael Igodoro, who you may or may not know, on the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, we must march to support our LGBTQIATS or 2S plus siblings around the world as they fight to attain the freedom and rights some of us enjoy and celebrate today. So when we march in New York City, we should also be having in the back of our mind folks in Ukraine, folks across the world, folks in Africa who are, you know, under serious threat, even more serious threat than we are here in New York City. We're in a privileged space to be here. So that all being said, this is what the Queer Liberation March is about. It's about limiting corporations and the way in which they get to speak for us or about us. We're about getting off of the sidewalk and joining onto the streets to have a voice. We're about removing barricades, and barricades are barriers to access, and we're about increasing access and mindful all the time about the disabled community, the queer community, and the ways in which they are queer and the way they identify in that way. And they should be with us. We're going to be having them at the front of the march again this year, as we did last year. And yeah, it's going to be an amazing day. We're starting in Foley Square this year, and we're going up to Washington Square as a march. What questions do you have for me?
Thank you so much, Paul. That was so beautiful. And I just loved seeing those videos in addition to your wonderful words, especially the 1970 video. I found so lovely to see a community kind of coming together in that way. I'm going to ask a couple of questions. And then while I ask these questions, please feel free, audience, to put your questions in the chat. And we'll read them aloud, and Paul can answer them for us. So you can think of these questions kind of as I'm asking these couple of questions. Yeah, the chat is open for everyone. So first of all, Paul, we have many people in New York City who are hopefully going to join us for this march, but we also have folks all over the country. We have folks who aren't able to for many reasons march. So how can people who aren't able to participate right now in the Queer Liberation March, how can they help fight for LGBTQ+ rights right now?
One of the things is to start locally. When we started our website and when we started everything that we're doing, it's reclaimpridanyc.org. We're not like, we do our best to brand what we're doing, but it's a matter of getting the message behind, right? Getting that message correct. Folks can organize locally wherever they are, and it's a good idea to either, if the principles are agreed upon that you think this is true, then protest in that way. Bring signs to your local either parade or festivities that clearly speak out about the way in which pride is political. I'm not making pride political. Pride is already political, but getting awareness of it and seeing the way in which we're impacted, that really is, it would be great if that could be sort of a part of every pride celebration across the country.
Pride is indeed so political, and I love the way you put that. I'm going to ask another question, and then, folks, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. There's no silly questions. So it's kind of a scary time to be queer right now, as you obviously probably know, with like the increase in, we're seeing these don't say gay laws, we're seeing attacks on trans children and families, and the Supreme Court is poised to vacate the right to privacy, upon which gay marriage depends. So there's a lot of queer people who are very worried, including myself, about many things. But I want to know, actually, not what are you worried about, but what gives you hope? What gives you hope in today's world?
That's a tough one, because some days you wake up and you recognize all that laundry list of what you've done, what you stated already. And it's not just marriage equality that's impacted by the upcoming court case that's could topple Roe v. Wade. It's our very existence as people, as sexual beings. Lawrence v. Texas was struck down, was a thing that struck down the sodomy laws across the country, and that was very deeply tied to the rights to privacy that were espoused in Roe v. Wade. And already in the leaked announcement, there was the leak that that said that it's not just Roe v. Wade that they're targeting, but it's all the things that stand on the shoulders of Roe v. Wade. So the title for this year's march, Queer Liberation March, is For Trans and BIPOC Freedom, Reproductive Justice, and Bodily Autonomy. These are all tied together. In terms of hope, it's one of those things like when we get into circles together, you have the worker circle, we have the Reclaim Pride circle. When we're in those circles and we're supporting each other, that does give me hope. When I see, right now, when I see candidates for the Republican Party who are not towing a Trump line or a fascist line or an unfair line. That does give me hope. Gives me hope that there are some reasonable folks on the other side of the aisle who are willing to sort of have some principle about how far is too far and how far is right, how are we going and which way are we going.
I love that idea, that solidarity, and when we come together in these circles, that's what gives me hope too. It's like seeing people like you and seeing people like all the people who are here today come together and fight for the same thing. We do have a question in the chat, and then we'll have to wrap up because it's a quick program today, but I do hope you all will join us at the march or at a march in your city. So the contrast between the first and the second video, which is like a promotion for politicians and brands, it's really stunning and sickening. You so articulately explained why the march was developed and why no corporations, no politicians, and no police is necessary. I'm wondering, are there concrete demands that the Queer Liberation March has for corporations who want to be pro-LGBTQ+, or for politicians, or for police?
None that are necessarily written out, although those general why we march statements sort of cover a lot of that. But, you know, just as an example, if T-Mobile really wants to support the queer community in a very specific way, they could make a timeline of queers in telecommunications and put that up in a very visible way in every one of their storefronts, right? That brings us visibility, which we desperately need. It highlights the way in which we're contributing to society, which we want, and that's the whole idea behind employee resource groups. When it comes to police, we'd like for them to look at structural changes that are absolutely necessary to make fairness happen. Now, you know, many of us in the coalition, although perhaps not all, are moving more and more towards an idea that that is expressed in the idea of abolition. Right? We know that police forces were originally designed to round up slaves who were running, and that history really informs where police departments are today. And the fact that so many Black and brown people are incarcerated is outsized by the way that we're doing things. So structural change, if that means refunding, like calling 911 and getting a social worker instead of a person with a gun on their hip, right? These kinds of changes are the changes that we're looking for and demanding. Politicians should not be marching in a parade or a march. They should be standing on the side, taking note of every sign that comes by and saying, how can we address this problem? How can we address this problem? How can we address this problem? Because that's their job. So, I mean, if I was going to put it down to what is the exact thing that we're demanding, do your jobs.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I think the Worker Circle, we can agree that our country, our democracy does need broad structural changes to make it work for its people and make it really, do its job. So I'm gonna wrap up now, but I really appreciate you coming to speak with us today. If you're in the New York area, we really hope that you'll join us for this Queer Liberation March on Sunday, June 26th. As Paul really so beautifully explained, this is a pride march by, for, and with the people. There'll be no corporations, there'll be no politicians, and there'll be no police. The Worker Circle delegation will gather in Foley Square at 1:30, and then we'll step off all together with the whole community at 2. And then we'll march up towards Washington Square Park. At the end, many of us are going to stay back and help clean up the park, and people of all ages, all genders, all sexual orientations are absolutely welcome to join us for this march. All participants will receive a free Worker Circle t-shirt and a really fun rainbow pride pennant that says Stolz, which is the Yiddish word for pride. So yeah, please join us. You can see the registration link in the chat. If you're looking for more online Pride programming, we have a really wonderful Zoom program coming up this Thursday called The Poetry of Cultural Recreation, a conversation with Irina Klepvich on Jewish and gender identity. We'll converse with Irina Klepvich, a feminist, lesbian, socialist, Yiddishist, poet, professor, and activist, about her journey and the shifts in gender and Jewish identity over the last half century. So I believe these links are in the chat, and feel free to join us for the Zoom program for the Queer Liberation March. We hope to see you there. And thank you so much, Paul, for taking the time to speak with us.
My pleasure.
You said one thing that really stuck with me. You said, "We are not the entertainment. We are marching for our rights and our voice. We are marching for the ways society is not serving us." And I think that's going to stick with me. That's why I'm marching, and that's why I'll be there Sunday. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.